it wasn't for Orson Welles making Citizen Kane, there wouldn't be a Creature from the Black Lagoon. Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. It's Science Fiction Saturday again. It's also October, which is spooky month. Hope everybody's doing fine because we're covering a trilogy of films from 1954, 1955 and 1956. Classic Universal horror films. In fact, the third one is the last of the classic Universal horror movies. Of course, it is The Creature from the Black Lagoon. You've seen the thumbnail. And I'm doing the two sequels as well, Revenge of the Creature from 1955 and The Creature Walks Among Us from 1956. I binge-watched them all again yesterday, and I've got some thoughts about them. We'll get started with 1954, the classic Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, I watched the wrong version of it, to be honest with you, because I've got it in two different places, because that's the way it is when you collect physical media. Got this box set, which I picked up who knows where. It's a Region 1 box set. Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Legacy Collection, which is as old as DVDs get. I mean, there it is outside the slipcover. There it is there. The second two movies are on the second disc. And I'm going to get rid of it. And going to throw it into a lake, or at least into a thrift store, because all three movies are in the wrong aspect ratio. They're in the 3:2 television aspect ratio rather than the cinematic one. So I'm cheesed off with that. I'll watch them anyway. I can review the movies okay, but I hate that box set and I'm getting rid of it. I'm going to have the whole house done out with sage afterwards. But then I realised this morning, actually this afternoon, I've got it in this box set as well, or at least the first of the three. The Universal Monsters classic set, Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein, The Wolfman, Phantom of the Opera, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. So I should have watched that one at least for the first film, but I didn't because I forgot I had that. Now I'm going to explain that bit about how Orson Welles, doing Citizen Kane, created Creature from the Black Lagoon, because there's a story there. The producer of Creature from the Black Lagoon was an American actor turned film producer and writer called William Allen. And William Allen was in the 1930s and the 1940s part of Orson Welles' Mercury Theatre. In fact, he was the reporter in Citizen Kane, the reporter Jerry Thompson, who is interviewing everybody about Charles Foster Kane, all that kind of thing. William Allen, who would end up being the producer of all three Creature movies, was having a dinner party of a whole bunch of people while Citizen Kane was happening. And a Mexican cinematographer, Gabriel Figueroa, told him about the myth of a race of half-fish, half-human creatures in the Amazon River. Alan wrote some story notes about it and put them away into his archive. He had a guy called Morris Zim expanded into a treatment. Harry Essex and Arthur Ross rewrote it as The Black Lagoon, and Jack Arnold was hired to direct it. So if it wasn't for that dinner party during the making of Citizen Kane, William Allen wouldn't have had the idea for this half-man, half-fish thing, and the movie would never have been made. So thanks to Orson Welles and thanks to William Allen listening to the stories of an interesting Mexican cinematographer. Now, the other story about this movie, before we even get into the movie, of course, is Milicent Patrick, who designed the head of the Gill Man. And Milicent Patrick had an interesting career. She was a Disney animator for a time, and she created the mask and the head for the Gill Man, even though for about 30 years afterwards, she wasn't given credit of it. Bud Westmore, the head makeup guy for Universal, got the credit for it, even though Milicent had done the work. In fact, she toured around America advertising the movie and showing her physical models of the head. And then when she got back to Universal Studios, Bud Westmore sacked her because he didn't want her taking the credit for her work. Because the 1950s in Hollywood, there were a lot of assholes who could do pretty much what they liked. So we'll talk about the cast first. The cast is fantastic. Richard Carlson, a scientist who investigates this weird creature, fossil of which has been found in the Amazon. His name is Dr. David Reed, though it never really matters what the names are in these kind of movies. Then, of course, we've got Julie Adams, who was known then as Julia Adams, playing Kay Lawrence, who also goes onto the expedition. Richard Denning as Dr. Mark Williams, who is the greedy money guy of the piece. He just wants to get the creature. He wants to monetize it. He is like everything that's wrong with capitalism in the 1950s. We also have Whit Bissell playing Dr. Edward Thompson, another scientist. Always good when Whit Bissell turns up in a 1950s science fiction movie. Nestor Piver playing Lucas, the captain of the boat they take up the Amazon. And Antonio Moreno as Dr. Carl Meyer, the guy who found the original fossil hand. So we've got all that. And of course, we then have the two stars of the movie. Ben Chapman playing the Gill Man on land, and Riku Browning playing the Gill Man underwater, where they filmed all of these beautiful underwater shots, mostly at a place called Wakulla Springs in Florida, where the water is incredibly clear and very deep. And that is part of the secret source of this movie, along with Milicent Patrick's work on the mask and the wonderful way that the mouth kind of opens and shuts like a fish out of water, and the way the gills pulse. I love that stuff. It's a beautiful piece of work. The expedition goes down the Amazon, finds the fossilized evidence, comes back again with a boat and a bunch of ichthyologists and character actors, and they figure out that the rest of the fossil is probably in a lagoon further down the river and may have been swept there by tides and currents and whatever else. So they get there and they find the Gill Man. Here's where they get everything wrong, because they try to capture him and they don't know what they're dealing with. And that's part of the fun of this, is these scientists who have got this stuff that paralyzes fishes, you throw it in the water, they've got explosives, they've got all sorts of stuff, but they don't know what they're dealing with. And what they're dealing with is a creature that's got a different intelligence than humans. If you watch the movie very carefully, thinks at least as well as the human beings in this movie. He's an intelligent non-human, and that's really interesting. The Gill Man traps them in the lagoon by dropping some trees across the entrance, and they've got to try to get a winch to get out, which delays them getting out. And the takeaway from this is they should never try to capture it. Yeah, get some photos, get some other evidence of it, but don't try to capture this thing because you don't know what you're dealing with. It's at least as smart as you are, and it's got a home ground advantage. Things go from bad to worse. The other interesting aspect of this, which it ends up being a part, and in fact the main emphasis, of a 2017 movie, The Shape of Water, that Guillermo del Toro did. Why is the Gill Man attracted to human women? That's a really interesting question to ask, because it's a common theme throughout the whole trilogy. We don't get a definitive answer to this, even though the third movie implies that the Gill Man is not too distantly related from human beings. And of course, it's the last of its species, so obviously it wants to do what it wants to do. But there's still that question of why humans? I mean, you could make the argument, just speculating, that in each case where he does follow human females, they may be menstruating at the time and swimming in the water. There are a whole bunch of wonderful things about this. Of course, you've got the direction of Jack Arnold, who does a fantastic job of giving us this other world in the lagoon. Then, of course, you've got the acting. Richard Carlson's always good in this kind of role. Richard Denning playing the nasty bastard is good. Julie Adams, I don't think she was ever quite as good in any other movie after this. She really seems to be a vital force in the lives of particularly Richard Carlson's character, to whom she's engaged. She's kind of more vivid in this than I've seen her in any other movie. There's also the music stings in this, which were made, for the most part, those really strident music stings that you get when the Gill Man appears. Were actually written by Henry Mancini. There are some other people who worked on various parts of the soundtrack, but Mancini did those stings, and they really work. And in fact, they've been on a couple of Mancini's albums as part of his work. The costume and the mask, you can't go past that. It sells this creature as being other than human. It's a rubber-suited monster, but it doesn't feel like a rubber-suited monster. And that's down to Ben Chapman and Riku Browning, of course. The monster just works, and without that, everything else is too silly. But that costume and the mask just sell it through all three movies. Even though in the second and third films there are some flaws in the costuming, they are an extraordinary piece of work. I think the sets are pretty good too. The boat is a great set, and the kind of underwater grottos where the Gill Man actually lives is a good set. It works well. It's slightly abstract, but it works to give us a sense that this is the turf of this monster. It's a much bigger set than a lot of these films often got. It's got depth to it. It's got breadth to it. It's got water in shallow pools. I think that kind of helps sell it as well. The monster is more than a wild animal. It's something we haven't seen before in cinema. It's not like Frankenstein. It's not even like King Kong. It's alien in the best kind of way. That's one of the reasons why I love it so much. And of course, then you've got the beautiful underwater photography, particularly when the Gill man is paralleling Julie Adams swimming on the surface. The way that Riku Browning conveys the fact that this creature is so incredibly comfortable in water, which is something that leads into the third movie where that becomes a totally different thing for the creature. First one has just got all of those qualities you want in a monster movie. It's got an interesting monster. It's got characters who are portrayed in an interesting way by actors who know what they're doing. You've got the direction. You've got those locations as well. Some of it's, of course, in the Arboretum in Los Angeles, but the underwater shots in Wakulla Springs are extraordinary. It feels like the Gill man could exist, which again is kind of rare for this kind of movie. Of course, there is a big industry in cryptids now, and people choose to believe all sorts of weird things. This one has a plausibility about it, which is enhanced by the design of the Gill man. Would it be nicer if he had a prehensile tail, a bit like a crocodile or an alligator? That would have really topped it off, I think. But that wasn't the case, and of course it would have been hard to do in any meaningful way with 1950s level of costuming. And there's a reason why the creature became iconic. Now, there have been a number of attempts to remake this film, and I've got a list. 1982, 1992, 1996, 2002, 2005, 2010, 2012, 2014, and as of August 2024, James Wan, the Australian director, is looking at doing a reboot of Creature from the Black Lagoon. I don't know whether it's going to be for A24 in conjunction with Universal. It may well be, because they've already done The Invisible Man and they're now doing The Wolf Man, totally rebooted and reinterpreted. There may be this thing where A24 is going to continue doing the classic Universal monster movies with new interpretations based on updating the IP in a sense. And I'm kind of there for that. I'd like The Invisible Man that was made, even though it's totally different from the original Invisible Man movies. I think it's a valid piece of horror cinema. I'll be interested to see what they do with The Wolfman, though a lot of people have already given it shit. And if they do choose to do a Creature from the Black Lagoon reboot, I'll be interested to see what they do. If I get the opportunity to, I will review it. That then takes us to the second film, Revenge of the Creature, aka Return of the Creature, and Return of the Creature from the Black Lagoon. 1955 movie, which was made in 3D. I haven't seen the 3D version. This again was produced by William Allen. It stars one of my least favourite actors in these kind of movies, and I've talked about it before, John Agar, the man who is not quite but almost as stiff as Peter Graves. And it moves the primary locations for the movie from the Amazon to Florida. They got to deal with an oceanarium in Florida to make the movie on site and to use their tanks and other places and some of their other attractions to flesh out the movie. It feels like it was made on a lower budget, to be honest with you. And it didn't make quite as much money as the first one did. The Gill man survives being riddled with bullets in the first movie, gets captured and sent to Ocean Harbor Oceanarium in Florida, where he is studied by animal psychologist Cleet Ferguson, played by John Agar, and Laurie Nelson playing Dr. Helen Dobson. We also have a third guy, a worker at the Oceanarium called Joe Hayes, played by an actor called John Bromfield, who had a bit of a career for a while in Hollywood, and then went on to become a commercial fisherman in Southern California. And why not? And we get a whole bunch of other people turning up, including a small role by Brett Halsey, who went on to do some horror movies and other genre films in the 1970s. Helen and Cleet fall in love, of course, and the Gill man has an attraction to Helen, and that always still feels weird. It still feels like it gives the Gill man a certain weirdness, which I suppose enhances the film but still feels odd. So they try to train the Gill man to respond by Pavlovian response. So they train it with basically an electric cattle prod. and vocal commands to get it to react and stop when they say no and when they say stop. So they've got it ankle chained to the bottom of this tank at the oceanarium and are training it to do what they say when they say it. Because again, they think it maybe is smarter than the people in the first movie think it is, but they don't quite know how smart. And they don't quite know that the Gill man is waiting for an opportunity, just like a prisoner waits for an opportunity to escape. Now, John Agar, to be fair, is a little less stiff in this than he has been in other movies, but he's still not engaging as an actor, let's put it that way. Laurie Nelson's a little more so, but not great. She's no Julie Adams, for instance, and Agar is definitely a lesser step down from Richard Carlson in the first movie. But the change of location makes it interesting, and you do see some other things like Flippy the Educated Porpoise, which was one of the attractions of the oceanarium. Every time I see that porpoise playing tricks, you think, you poor bastard, you're a prisoner there, and they've taught you to be their bitch. And you end up with this weird ending where the Gill man escapes and grabs Helen and decides to take her away, who knows where. And because he is a Gill man who can only stay out of water for a few minutes, he's grabbing her, carrying her through the water, putting her on the beach while he goes back into the water to basically oxygenate, I suppose. Grabs her again, takes her down the beach, gets in the water again, and is doing it that way to escape from human civilization. Of course you're going to, because human civilization has never done the Gill man any favours. Cleet, aided by the local police, tracks it down. They find out where the creature is, and eventually, of course, they shoot him to save Helen. That's not really a spoiler, because you knew that shit was going to happen right from the word go. So it's definitely a smaller piece of film, but it uses a bit wider locations. You've got the St. Johns River, you've got Jacksonville, Florida as part of the location, so it gives it a bit of a groundedness there. Taking the creature out of the Black Lagoon and into a human civilization and a human milieu, it's kind of sad. I like the fact that people are trying to beat the creature on its own home turf. I think that's got more of a sense of menace and more of a sense of violence about it than having it in a world of convertibles and police cars with sirens and things like that. I think that works better. That primitive environment makes for a much more interesting movie with the creature than the environs of Jacksonville, Florida. The movie made us money, and apart from Agar and Laurie Nelson being a bit flat, it kind of works. And the other weird thing is too, they've made changes to the costume where there are bubbles coming out of the top of the Gill man's head. So there's obviously some kind of an air hose and possibly an air tank under the costume, which enabled Riku Browning to spend more time underwater in the various oceanarium tanks that he's in. But it doesn't look right. That little kind of nipple on the top of the head, squirting bubbles out of the top of it, I think is a mistake. And to incorporate that, the headpiece of the creature's costume has been altered to make the head a little bit larger. And I don't think that works very well at all either. I think it looks more like a costume than the one in the first movie. And I think that's very much a big mistake, because the selling point is how wonderful the Gill man's design is. Oh yeah, the other credit too is an actress called Ginger Stanley did the stunt doubling for both Laurie Nelson and Julie Adams in the first two movies. That couldn't have been easy, spending all that time underwater. Credit where credit's due. The other interesting thing we get with Revenge of the Creature is there's a little cameo at the start with Clint Eastwood playing a lab tech named Jennings, who works with John Agar's character at the start. He's the dumb lab assistant, in a sense. And he's not there for any purpose apart from giving John Agar's character someone to talk to at the start of the film. I've got my problems with Clint Eastwood as an actor. I think the only thing he was really great in was Unforgiven, and that's quite late in his career. And the rest of it, he just kind of aped Randolph Scott and Gary Cooper for most of his career. But that's a controversial thing to say, and so leave a comment. But he's in there as well, not too far after he played the jet pilot who bombs Tarantula with napalm. But yeah, he's in it as well, but he leaves no impact because he he's at that stage of his career, he doesn't know how to play to a camera. Then we get the third one, which is deeply weird. The Creature Walks Among Us from 1956. And this one mixes a few genres. Again, it's produced by William Allen. In this case, it's directed by not Jack Arnold, but John Sherwood. And it's the least of the three, but it is kind of interesting for a few reasons. And from a Monster Kid viewpoint, part of the interesting thing is we get Jeff Morrow and Rex Reason back after they made This Island Earth. And in this case, they're playing two very different characters. The mandatory female love interest for both the Creature and at least one of the characters is played by an actress called Lee Snowden. There's also another actor called Greg Palmer in there. And the Creature is played by first Riku Browning, who does all the underwater stuff again, and by Don McGowan, who was like a 6'3" stuntman actor. He's the guy who, when you see Blazing Saddles, gets kicked in the nuts by Lily Von Stupp for getting up on the stage during one of her numbers. That's Don McGowan. He was also the lead character in Creation of the Humanoids in 1962. But he's not the sort of person you think to play the Gill Man. But anyway, this one is kind of weird and interesting. The movie starts after the Gill Man's escape from Ocean Harbor Oceanarium in Florida, and a team of scientists with a well-equipped yacht goes searching for it in the Everglades. There's some clues to where it is. There's a fisherman who got torn up by it in the Everglades, so they know that it's around that area. The expedition is led by Dr. William Barton, played by Jeff Morrow, who's a nutcase. And we get a bit of the reason why he's a nutcase a little bit later when his wife, played by Lee Snowden, her name is Marsha, talks to Rex Reason's character, Dr. Thomas Morgan, about her marriage and says that she's been married for 10 years and she's been married to Barton since she was 17, which is really interesting and really off. And Barton's a really interesting, weird character. He's an abusive husband to his wife. He's sexually jealous. Anytime she talks to another man, he thinks that she wants to have an affair with them. And there is a couple of lines of dialogue that suggest that he may be, let's just say his flag's at half-mast. There's also another person on the boat, a guy called Jed Grant, played by Greg Palmer, who's also in Zombies of Moritao. And he's constantly putting the hard word on Marsha, but she knocks him back. So there's this weird character dynamic above the surface while they're looking for the creature. And they use things, they've got a primitive version of fish finder sonar, where they can detect schools of fish under the water, and they can also detect where the creature is. They go out on a dive to find it, and Marsha decides she's going to go there too. She's a tough woman. She goes down there, but she gets a bit of nitrogen narcosis and gets a bit gaga under the water, so she's got to be rescued. And there are a couple of encounters with the Gill Man, and then the Gill Man gets captured and gets burned in a fire. They throw some fire on him as he attacks everybody in a small boat, and he gets severely burned. His gills get burned off, his skin gets burns all over it. He's not in a good way, so they sedate him and take him back to Barton's house, which has got a big laboratory to it. And they find out some weird things about the creature. The creature is shedding its gills, and he's got a kind of rudimentary lung system inside, which they didn't know or suspect. And as they oxygenate his blood more, the lungs start functioning. The Gill Man also sheds a lot of his scales and has a human-like skin underneath, so he becomes partly human by having all of these genes which weren't expressed suddenly expressing themselves, and he becomes ugly as shit. Now, the doctors, being scientists and being idiots, with the possible exception of Morgan, who questions all of this stuff, decide that they're going to try to get the Gill Man to live in some ways in human society. They give him clothing to wear, and he's in a cage outdoors, which is, not a good thing. And he always looks out to sea because he wants to go back to the sea, even though he can't function in the sea. We do see him at one stage trying to swim under the water, and he just sinks like a rock because his gills don't work anymore. But then there's a couple of twists and turns, mostly to do with Barton being a nutcase, where the movie then turns into kind of a murder mystery almost, in a sense. Not a fully developed murder mystery subplot, but one which happens at the end. It's a weird film. Tonally, it shifts in a number of ways and a number of times. And the human drama is pushed much further to the forefront than it is in the other films. So it fits thematically into the trilogy, but it still has an oddness about it and a weirdness about it. And having big hulking Don McGowan playing the changed creature, making it a little more Frankensteinian perhaps, is an odd choice and is a weirdness and is something that I think weakens our sense of who and what the creature from the Black Lagoon itself is. I think it's still an honest movie. I don't think it totally jumps the shark for the series, but it's an odd choice, and it's a fairly short film too. It only runs 77 minutes, which possibly could have been a budgetary thing. It made $1 million, so it did kind of okay at the box office, but it still has a weirdness about it, and it still has an oddness about it. Looking at it now, the focus is less on the creature than on the toxic masculinity of William Barton, the character. The way he treats his wife, the way he married her when she was 17, the way he talks and acts around other people. It plays more to a different dynamic than science fiction monster movie, and makes it more about an abusive relationship. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I find it quite weird that you've got that tonal shift in there. Ultimately, you feel sorry for the creature. The creature should have been left the hell alone in the Black Lagoon. I understand studying rare creatures in their natural environment, but all through 3 movies, the humans do all the wrong things, not only for themselves, because ultimately they get injured if not traumatized, but also for the creature and for the way human beings interact with this incredibly unique specimen. But the narrative in the movies is never positioned that way, and I think it should have been. There should have been somebody there saying, you screwed up, you did all the wrong things with this. You really didn't need to move this creature from its environment, because it could have been studied where it was. Look what you did to it. I think that's a valid way of doing it. And if James Wan does reboot Creature from the Black Lagoon, I'd like to see that thread in the narrative, that criticism of the way things are handled, because for me that would make it a much more interesting movie than just doing creature comes in, starts attacking guys, starts leching after women, that kind of thing. Because ultimately in the 3rd movie, the monster is not the creature, the monster is William Barton. And I kind of like that, while I'm still not okay with that in a weird way. Watching the trilogy was a good thing. Seeing the kind of diminished budgets in each of them was a bit disappointing, but there's a thematic thread through there of this creature who is tortured by human beings through all 3 movies without them ever realizing what it is. I think that's an interesting thread through the 3 movies. So that's what I've got for you this time around. The 3 creature movies, and they're all worth seeing on a much better edition than that. I'm going to have to find a way to get the other 2 movies in a much better one, because this one is seriously starting to cheese me off. And The Creature Walks Among Us is considered the last of the classic Universal horror movie cycle, and I can understand that. And to be honest with you, it's not an entirely disreputable conclusion to that long history that dates back as far as 1931. So let me know what you think. Let me know whether you've seen these movies lately. Let me know whether you've seen them at all. Tell me what you think about them and about my interpretations of them. As usual, you can like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up on Sunday/Monday, we've got the monthly live stream where I'm talking about a whole bunch of stuff I've watched and a whole bunch of new stuff I've acquired hunting around thrift stores, op shops to people here in Australia. So that one's going to be fun. And even if you can't make the live stream, they're often fun to watch afterwards. So until all of that happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Stay out of the water if you don't know what's in it, and I'll catch you next time.